Good evening, everybody. The time is 6 p.m. and this meeting is hereby called to order. We have the presence of a quorum and the meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been posted for the time and manner required by law. First up, our information items. First being our 2019-20 Budget Development and Legislative Update. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. Steve has, as you know, invested a lot of energy this spring in the legislative session, and his team has done a phenomenal job of developing a budget plan, and so he's going to get into a lot more detail tonight.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Dupree, Mr. President, members of the board. So there's a lot of ground to cover. We're going to go a little bit out of order because really the story is more on the general fund and stuff we want to talk about there. So we'll get to that last. Talk a little bit about the debt service first, and then child nutrition, and then speak about the latest we've learned from legislative update. They're still going through, I think, on the Senate floor right now, discussion on the current bill. And then we'll get into the general fund, and we will give you a three-year outlook. So we have a lot of good news to report on the debt transactions that we had. We priced April 23rd. This is the first time we did multiple, two transactions actually the same day, same time, different underwriters, but we were in the office of one underwriter. We had met with the underwriter before, a lot of time on the phone, but we issued $100 million in variable rate debt for a 3-year time frame. 1.95 was the interest rate. The all-in cost was 1.98. Really excited about that. Because we're in the market at the same time doing fixed rate, we're able to see really what would the market have borne, doing that same transaction if we'd done it on a fixed rate basis. And we think over the 3 years time frame, we'll save $5 million in interest expense. And so, again, variable rate is just one of those ways that it's one of those tools in our toolkit to really help manage our tax rate and to keep our debt costs down. And so being able to save $5 million we're definitely happy with that. We did the refunding of the 2019 bonds, the 2009 bonds. We refunded those, $131 million. So you can see the results of that. The average life of those bonds is 10 years. The all-in cost is 2.78. So that's also very good. What we're really happy about is that we have net present savings of $26.2 million, which is a very strong number given that size. So we're excited about that. What's interesting, though, and why we underlined it is that whenever the tax laws were going to change at the end of December 17, we had a long line of underwriters wanting to talk to us. Well, they always want to talk to us, but especially then, they said, hey, you need to refund these 2009 bonds, do it on an advanced basis so you can lock in the interest rate because you can't do advanced refundings in the future. And basically we said, no, we're going to wait. And we're really happy we did because if you look back at what the projections were for the transactions, if we'd done something in December, we saved $7 million more by waiting. And we've been rewarded by being patient more than once. This is just another good example of that. So we're real excited about that. Also, I wanted to mention because I know that, we have our goals on our small business and whatever else. And then also, with Dr. Dupree being able to go, he noticed some things that I just didn't notice and don't think along these lines. But it's important to point out, though, because a lot of people don't think about who we contract with and why. We really contract with folks who come to us with great ideas and can just deliver the best value, and we got great value. But it's also important for everybody to understand that a lot of the companies that we contract with place a high emphasis on minority hiring. So, for example, in the variable rate deal that we did, that was with United Bank of Switzerland, 3 out of the 4 of the folks that we were working with on that transaction were African American. And that surprised Dr. Dupree. And it didn't surprise me because I'd worked with them, because I'd been with them before. And then on the next bond, on the refunding, that was with Siebert, Cisneros, and Schenck, which is just a minority firm as a whole. And the banker, Keith Richard, he's also African American. He's the one who helped us with the green bond deal a couple years ago that you're familiar with. And but that entire firm is minority owned. So anyway, just wanted to point that out. Just because you probably wouldn't have known that unless I said anything about it. So anyway, okay, we have some transactions coming up. We're going to be back in the market in July. combining Series 15A and 15B. Those are variable rate debt, $70 million. We could add to that depending on the cash flow, and we may. So we're just going to wait to see. You know, we've been, I think, and we're going to talk about, we're going to give you a bond update in June, and there's a lot that has been done already. And so depending on how cash flow is, we may add to that transaction in July, or else we'll wait a little bit longer. And then also it's important to note that the district did increase while our overall rating remained unchanged at AA+, S&P upgraded our financial management practices from good to strong. So that was good to see whenever they put that report together. So on the debt side, you can see what we're projecting. You can see the original budget and our projections, and what we're looking at preliminary for 1920. And so we're adding to the fund balance, and the fund balance will give us the option later to help manage our tax rate if need be. But it's important that we have a fund balance the size that we have, because we make, this is as of June 30th, and we make significant debt payments August 1st. And so the way it's set out right now is that we would end up with a balance of just over $20 million in our fund balance after we make those payments in August. It's also important to have some fund balance because the state is looking at increasing the homestead exemption. And unlike the last time when they increased the homestead exemption, I think there was language to hold districts harmless for that. I haven't seen anything along those lines in the bills. And so, if they did increase the hold harmless, not the homestead exemption from 25 to 40,000, that could cost us another, $1.5 million. They've held us harmless in the past, but I'm just not sure. But you never know, and we got to make plans as if current law is going to be in place. So that's where we're at on the debt service side. Child nutrition. So we had a budget of breaking even. We do think that we're going to be a little bit higher than that, and I'll show you how we're doing on our participation. We have spent more than originally expected because we needed to make some investments that were long overdue, some capital expenses, and then also just some things for basic safety in the kitchen that we didn't let them do in the past. And so when I found out about some of the things they wanted to do, I said, by all means, let's just make those investments. But we continue to do well in our participation, and we think that we're going to be able to get up to the $7 million fund balance, which is closer to the 3 months. So we're just over 2 months, but we'll get up to the 3 months, I think, within a couple years. If you look at our free and reduced count, so through March, we're actually at 45.3% total free and reduced throughout the district. If you look back at some of the historical numbers, we used to be higher, than 37.9. Remember, we were dropping because we weren't collecting open balances. And so remember, just to remind you that it was in the 16-17 year that we got started with the alternate meal again. And you can see the impact of that. Now, the alternate meal isn't responsible wholly for going from 39% to 45%, but it certainly had a big role to play. The state made some changes to help with an automated perspective. Folks that were already in Medicare or other registered in other areas, that they were directly certified, and so they don't have to go through the process. So that did increase their percentage as well. But you can see that we're at 45.3%, and I think that still surprises a lot of people when they see our numbers that high. Any questions on debt service or child nutrition before I get into the general fund? This may be a good time to break, or I'm sorry.
Mrs. James?
Oh, I'm sorry. I still have one more, participation. Okay. So there's our participation. I'm sorry. So you can see the green line up above. We're really doing well. We dropped off the year before in the September timeframe because of Hurricane Harvey, but you can see how we're above our highest point all the way through the year, through the end of March on our participation, and we're going to keep working to have that be as high as we can get. So you can see we have some months over 70% now, which is good, and that's where we finished up in March.
Mrs. James?
Okay, Mr. Bassett, thank you, Mr. Rudine. I'm not sure I understand that graph.
So this is the participation. This is the number of children that are eating the meals, the percentage of enrollment.
Okay, so
Okay, that are eating.
our enrollment percentage for the district is 45.3%.
That's the free and reduced percentage.
Okay,
And then, so this is the
The
number
number.
of kids participating in that are eating in the cafeteria. And
that
it's-
are
and it's
in the free and reduced program?
No,
Or
all
that
kids.
are all kids?
all
Okay,
kids.
got
So,
it, got
yeah,
it,
this has nothing to do with free and reduced, although typically as your free and reduced counts grow, your participation grows.
Right.
Okay, so I mean, I think that's part of the reasons why, but this growth is much higher than the gains that we've had in free and reduced, if you compare those.
Right, okay, thank you. So that's kids that are buying lunch at school,
Yeah.
basically.
Lunch
Okay.
and a la carte and,
Yeah.
and breakfast, everything.
Okay, that's great. So my question was about the 45.3%.
Mhm.
So that's the free and reduced count. And do you think that that's pretty representative of what's actually out there in our district? Or do you think there's still pockets of kids not identified?
I think there's still pockets of kids, whenever I talk to principals, I don't know if, Joe, if you want to make a comment on that, but one of the things that I think the reason why the state, what I've heard, the reason why the state's moving to census tracts and census blocks is because they're under the impression that some kids still aren't registering that need services. But I don't know if you want to.
We have been working year after year to try to identify more kids, and the principals are doing a great job. I mean, but we still have some families that, resist going through the process and filling out the required forms. I mean, what we do is we've been trying to identify the students from the past years and try to ensure that, if there's been a change in their family that has impacted them to all of a sudden not be free or reduced, we try to identify what that is. But the principals are doing a good job at trying to, identify all kids.
Something else we identified this year is that we heard that there's still the perception out there that the children that qualify for free and reduced still have to go to that one line in the cafeteria. Well, that's not the case anymore. Two and a half years ago, I think we made the change where you can have a reimbursable meal in all of the lines. And so there's no way for the child to be singled out. Plus, we're not collecting nearly as much cash. I mean, kids are putting in their numbers. And so, unless a child's just volunteering that, hey, I'm on the list, I don't think that the other kids really know.
Yeah, that's great. So because that was a barrier for some kids, and that's why we've talked about, universal breakfast and things
Right.
like that, because that singles kids out too as well, right? So, okay, well, thank you for working on that, because I'm not sure the children and the families all realize all the other services that are available to them, and, testing test for testing, PSAT and those types of things, and
Exactly.
so, and just don't think that they realize the benefits, all the other things that go with it.
We've put
so.
together flyers that outline everything besides meals in both English and Spanish. We just, but there's turnover. People move in and out of the district.
Right,
And so
right,
on an ongoing basis, we need to make sure that that's handy for people to see.
Yeah, okay, great, well, thank you.
Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. Mr. Bassett, so this slide 7, as Mrs. James was saying, 45.3% of roughly 76,000 kids is 34,428 children qualify for free and reduced lunch. Comparing that to, I don't recall what our student population was in 2014, 2015, but 38% back then. Theoretically, I'm just going to guess that we were 10,000 students fewer then than we are now.
Approximately.
So the number of our ECODIS student population is going up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then on slide 6, what is the allowable fund balance that we're able to carry before the federal government wants us to either return the money or spend it on something?
You're limited to 3 months, which in our case would be under 30 million operating expenditures. That'd be 7.5 million.
So we're a couple years away from that.
Yeah, I think so. But we're also going to be able to transfer more to the general fund for indirect costs, and so I think could be even longer than a few years before that becomes a problem.
We're able to transfer to the general fund for what?
To cover indirect costs, for administrative costs, Okay,
Okay.
they've relaxed the rules a little bit on that
Okay.
to be able to charge that fund a little bit more to
Okay.
pay.
All right. And then going back to page, or slide, page 5. I wasn't quite following you on the fund balance. You're saying we need to maintain this fund balance because after we make the payments in August, we're gonna have $20 million?
Right, we'll have, so we make a big payment in the August 1st. We make payments typically February 1st and August 1st. And so, at the end of this fiscal year, June 30th, we think we'll have a fund balance, at, 78 million. But we will go down to 20.2 million after we make those payments. Okay? And so, you don't want to get too low. And then you also, what we're not sure about is, how much any of the property tax relief that they're looking at could impact this fund.
Right.
In some of the bills I've seen that debt service is excluded, but you still don't know until things are signed off.
Yeah, because they're not done yet.
Yes, sir, that's right.
No one's safe while the legislature's in session. And then on page 3, will you please remind me of the ratio for our variable rate of the total? Was it 20%?
25% is the threshold, and we're at that. By issuing the 100 million, we're pretty much right at 25%. But whenever we get to August and we make payments, then that'll go down because we're going to be making some larger payments on that.
So how much will it go down in August?
Oh, I think it'll probably be in the maybe the 22, 23% range. I'd have to go back and check for you if you really want to know.
Okay. And the commercial paper's saving us a lot of money.
Yeah, I didn't have that on this slide, but we're over 8 million now. So since we've had that in 2016, we implemented that I think in November of 2016, and so we're approaching $9 million. And every month we go through, it just keeps adding to that savings.
Okay, one question, you don't have to answer it tonight, but I'm going to ask Dr. Dupree to investigate having a disclosure council. We've had some brief conversations about that, but thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Okay, so jumping into the legislative session update. So the CEI has been repealed in both of the bills that are being discussed. I can't believe I'm gonna tell you what I'm gonna tell you, but actually, so during the amendment process today on the floor, I got a text from Chris Smith, over at Katy, Senator Taylor, who's in charge of the Senate Education Committee. He put forward an amendment. It was Amendment 38 for the Senate to study having a cost education or some kind of cost index again in the future because cost differences to educate kids throughout the state do differ between regions. So I'll just leave it at that. What is disappointing about that is that you're going to need to have some kind of surplus close to what they've had in order to re-implement a cost index, because it's not cheap, and they took out basically 2.9 billion, from the funding formula the way it is and just put it into the basic allotment. And so to implement it back, they're going to need to be able to find close to $3 billion, depending on how they want to put it back in. So anyway, it's just discouraging is a good word for that. So you can see the differences in the basic allotment. Again, all of this is really in play right now. Some of the major differences: the compressed rate. So the House bill would take 4 pennies off every school district's rate. They would compress everybody's M&O tax rate by 4 pennies. The Senate wants to go farther than that. They're looking at doing 8 pennies in the coming year, and then they would go down 6 more pennies the following year. But the following year would only be if they were successful with that constitutional amendment to have a shift from property tax to sales tax. So that's for the sales tax to go up a penny. You may have read about that. So that's the way it would look in the school funding formula if that was done. So anyway, they would go down, and one of the things that we had an ambassador meeting with some of our employees that have agreed to help us with some of our legislative advocacy, And our real concern with that is just, I'm not concerned that the state would be able to maintain the 96. You know, going down 4 pennies, I think that can be handled long term. But when you go farther than that, if you think about, you know, what could happen from a economic perspective throughout the country, I just worry about putting us into the situation that we were in 2011 again, where the state wouldn't be able to live up to its commitments, and districts would have less funding than the prior year, like we had in 2011. And so those are the things we've been saying, you know, to any of the Senate staffers that would listen, is our concerns about that. Both decouple the golden pennies. The yield goes down in both. It goes down a little bit more in the Senate bill than the House bill. And the House bill, though, adds 2 golden pennies. The Senate bill just keeps it at 6. The copper pennies, that's the not too different, you know, 48.24 versus 47. I mean, we're still well below that. That sets the recapture threshold if you have a TRE. And so we're going to be well below that for a while. And so you can see that the number of copper pennies that would be available under the House bill is 13 pennies versus 11 on the Senate bill. The biggest difference, though, and the thing that I think is going to cause the biggest issue between the two houses is the mandatory increase. So I spoke about House Bill 3 having the 25% of the basic allotment increase go to salaries. The Senate has $5,000 per full-time teacher and librarian. And so that's what that's really what is going to, I think, have the most reason for them to work things out in the Conference Committee. So we'll have to see what happens through all the amendments. So there's still plenty of uncertainty with how things are going. You can see, you know, the way that the two bills are, neither one of us gives us substantial help. The House bill has a more generous hold harmless of 3% above current law. The Senate just says, hey, we'll pay you for it. We'll be at current law plus whatever you have to get, plus whatever you have to pay for the mandatory raises. Okay, so there's a hold harmless for that. The question is whether or not that hold harmless would extend beyond 5 years. And so they're talking about that, and there's some amendments that are on the floor that they're going to discuss related to that. So really wouldn't know what else to say along those lines. So what we've done is to really, you know, put together a budget based on current law, because we could put 100 different scenarios for you, but we really need to just focus on current law. And so, you know, we're trying to, you know, fund board priorities and to support our goals of objectives, doing what it can to stay within the 90 days, but then also provide alternatives. And so that's really what we're going to be getting into to be able to impact our strategy long term. So I'm going to turn this over to Luis is going to go through a few slides, and then Brian is going to go after that. So you're just going to click on that up there, right? Okay.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board, and Dr. Dupree. This evening, we will be presenting the 2019-20 budget work that has been done up to date. And our assumptions, as you can see in this slide, include, similar to prior presentations, we're following the convention. We're following the convention of using the dark green for values that is, you know, we have a high degree of certainty, and the gold for values that still have it's a fair degree of certainty around those inputs. So the first one is the average CELI membership. So that was derived from the projections for 1920 from our demographer, PASA. The average daily attendance at a 96.5%, that's within the range that we have seen in the last 10 years. It fluctuates from 96.5 to 97% attendance rate. We're including on the revenue the 10% of total enrollment for special education enrollment. So that is roughly 77 or 7,723 students, and that's about a 1% increase from the PIM snapshot for for 18-19. We visited with the chief appraiser, and we received the certified preliminary roll in April 29. And after looking at those numbers, we feel pretty good about the 5% increase. We have included discount rates for the property that is under protest for the appraisal board review. And even with those discounts based on historical trends, the 5% seems to be a very stable number. CPTD value growth, we received that information on January the 29th of this year. So it's going to be a 4.9%, and that's a given. Our weighted average daily attendance, the growth that we're seeing from prior years, you might recall that we're always within 1% growth or 1.5% growth. This year, we're projecting a 2.7% growth, and that's due to the increase in special education population, CTE, and free and reduced counts. So all the weighted populations that have a weighted allotment, we consider that they're going to increase. The Austin yield is based on the legislative board calculations. It's at $126. Free and reduced counts were at 33,978. That's 44%. It's, like as you saw earlier in the presentation, we're at a 45% free and reduced at this point. We're using a 44% because the formula considers the six highest months. So we're, being a little bit conservative in that sense to make sure that, all the counts for every month played out to that percentage. We're also including staffing approvals up to date. That's 15.5 million, and that represents 266 FTEs. And also, we have 6.36 million, 107 FTEs that of new positions that we're bringing to your consideration this evening. So to give you an idea of, or remind you of the positions that have been approved up to date, and these are aligned with the district goals. We have the opening of Malala Yousafzai Elementary School, and that's staffing. Reed CTE Center, the staffing that was approved on March board meeting. The enrollment growth derived from the application of the staffing guidelines. And under goal 2, we have early college high school. So as you might recall, there was an item for early college high school at Willow Ridge, Marshall, and Hightower. We have the costs associated with the early literacy center expansion, and also the early intervention academy expansion. So that's the 266 FTEs currently approved up to date. For a total cost of $15.6 million. Some of the staff that you're going to be seeing later this afternoon include compensation adjustments and actual FTEs. Under Goal 1, we have GT liaison stipend. Under Goal 2, ABL teachers and school improvement specialists, behavior support for Tier 3 students, literacy and math coaches for Marshall High School, and SPED support staff, trauma-informed care FTEs, and FTE for a director of collaborative communities to continue that work. We also have 2 careers for the police department, stipend adjustment for special education and priority teacher placement, facilities and maintenance staff, We have some information and technology and alarm technicians also for the police department. So the total cost of the item that you will see later this evening is 6.4 million. So as we mentioned in the prior board meeting back in April, we're anticipating finishing the year 18-19 on a positive note. We're projecting a total surplus of 4.1 million, as opposed to the fund balance drawdown that we were originally expecting. So the surplus is mainly driven by increasing charge, increasing the investment earnings. We have some, as you might recall, property adjustments for prior years for 2017. That's a one-time item. And also the additional investment earnings for this 18-19 fiscal year. So based on the assumptions, fast forward to 19-20 preliminary, based on the assumptions that I mentioned earlier, the preliminary budget estimates 681.9 million in revenue and 691 million in expenditures. All this, the expenditure side is inclusive of the positions that have been approved up to date, and also has a placeholder for the positions that the board will be reviewing this evening. And also we have a placeholder of a 2% for compensation adjustments for 19-20 only. So all those costs are built in the operating expenditure. So we have the transfer in from extended learning and enterprise funds for 2 million, and that the net result is a $7.6 million of use of economic stabilization. So as far as fund balance, as you can appreciate, 18-19, the third column, we're 99 days fund balance, and then fast forward 19-20, we're at 90 days. So we're keeping, or we're maintaining above the 90-day policy for 19-20. This evening, we're also presenting to you a 3-year budget outlook based on current law. As Steve mentioned, the assumptions consider for this long-range iteration of the budget included sustained property value growth of 5%, the new teacher and support staff derived from increases in projection for enrollment. So this is all the personnel that will be added once we apply the staffing allocations and the staffing guidelines for the outer years. And we'll also include the increases our campus budget, given that we do an per pupil allocation, and this is also driven by enrollment growth. We have early college high school teachers, so as the cohort moves on, there's an investment in additional teachers to support the program, and this is from 2020 to 2023. Also, we have placeholders for around 4 million each year to be able to support the expected growth of special education population. The projections also include a $2 million placeholder for health fund contribution to try to maintain the health fund, placeholder for the 2% for compensation adjustment. Like I mentioned, this is only applied to 19-20 fiscal year, And from 21-22, we had all the costs for startup and support personnel for the opening of elementary 52 and 53. And then on year 22-23, you'll see the costs associated with the startup and opening of high school 12 as far as support personnel. So the 3-year budget outlook with no tax ratification election, we have, well, the 1920 is a baseline, and we notice that the 3-year outlook showing revenues, they are catching up to the expenses in year 21-22, and maintaining the operational reserve at 93 days and 94 days respective, or 95 days and 96 days respectively at 2020 or 2021 and 2022, and 94 days in 22-23. The only thing that, you know, like I would like to highlight here, this forecast does not include any other investment for the outer years from 2021, 22, and 23. So this is basically maintaining the investments that we could potentially be doing, including the items that you're going to be reviewing tonight. And after that, there's no other compensation adjustment or additions for board priority positions. And also, we have in 2023, we have a healthy fund balance also over the 94 days. So for all 3 years, consider no more investments than the ones that we're proposing for 1920, then we would be able to sustain about the 90-day fund balance policy for all 3 years. And with that, I give
Thank you, Luis. Good evening, members of the board, Mr. President. As we've indicated over the last several meetings, we are not expecting any new recurring revenue from the state. And amongst this uncertainty, we're coming to the point where we are going to recommend that the board consider moving forward with a tax ratification election. One of the primary concerns is around compensation. As Luis mentioned, there's a 2% increase that is built in for 1920, but beyond that, there's no additional adjustments being made. If we were to move forward with a tax ratification election, that does mean that we could make some adjustments there, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. And then the other thing that I would indicate is that as we look at what surrounding districts are doing, we are seeing that they have made adjustments the past year, whereas we did not. You may recall the board didn't approve an overall general compensation adjustment. However, there was a one-time retention supplement that was included, which was the teachers received their step of $500 and then a $500 retention supplement. Non-teaching staff received a 2% adjustment up to $1,000 on their retention supplement, but overall there was no recurring adjustments made. So the TRE does provide us flexibility to address compensation, and it also provides additional revenues that we could use to fund board priorities that I'll show you in just a moment. So as I walk you through the areas that have been targeted to utilize the tax ratification election funds, it's important to highlight that these expenditures would not automatically be added to the budget. Any of the items that we're sharing with you this evening, if the tax ratification election were successful, we would come back to you with a package that you would be approving, whether it be additional positions or compensation. Well, as I say this, as I go through the timeline for doing a TRE, one of the things that we have to do in terms of going forward with a TRE is the budget that's adopted by the board has to support the tax rate that's being requested. So that's part of the reason that as you see the numbers that I'll share with you, they are above what Louise shared with you and what the current tax rate can support. However, we very clearly delineated those expenditures that we would be utilizing as part of the TRE, and that's what the start of this list is. So under goal 1, we do have additional expenditures that would be considered for kindergarten through 5th grade literacy, STEM, and ELA support. This would come in the way of coaches that support teachers in those subject areas at the elementary level. There's also additional support for GT. It would add GT specialists that would provide district level support to the liaisons that are on each campus. Louise showed you just a moment ago that there is a stipend for GT stipends. This would be the district level staff that assists the staff at the campuses with those programs. And then, as we've discussed before, whether current legislation as being proposed, it includes full day pre-K as a requirement in House Bill 3. We feel internally that regardless of whether or not that is successful, that it's something that we should do because it benefits students later on in their academic career. So we would propose rolling out full day pre-K to all eligible students. And then early childhood instructional support would be included. This is primarily associated with bilingual education. Under goal 2, tier 3 behavior issues continue to be a top issue that both teachers and campus administrators point out. And the TRE would provide additional resources to address those tier 3 student behaviors that are difficult to address at the campus level. And I would mention that this would be in lieu of sending those particular students to the district's alternative education program. So it would be a program that would allow them to learn how to adjust to a classroom setting without having to send them to one of those alternative education programs. Under goal 3, we have additional resources that would be added to address workload associated with the ARD process at campuses. It also includes additional LSSPs that would be able to assist with identifying students eligible to receive SPED services. It also includes additional STEM outclass teachers. They would serve 2 purposes. One is they would provide additional enrichment opportunities such as coding and robotics to elementary students, but it also is important because it allows adequate time for teacher planning. So it takes those students out of their regular classroom setting and puts them in an outclass so that the teacher of record has time to do their planning as necessary. And then finally, for goal 4, we have 6 additional mental health counselors that would be added in support of trauma-informed care. Luis, when he shared that information, that includes a component, but this would allow for a more robust program, if you will, and rolling it out at more campuses as opposed to the small number that we have with the funds that are available within our existing resources. It also includes resources to increase the number of school counselors at the high school level, which would provide better access to post-secondary career and college readiness, and additional resources to increase the quality of student health care services. Right now, if a nurse is absent on a campus, that is a difficult position to fill. This would add itinerant nurses and a program coordinator to assist with making sure that we have coverage at campuses in the event of an absence. And then moving away from the specific board goals and objectives, but with some of those items that are highlighted by the board to address continuous improvement in scalable systems. Resources are included for business intelligence work. This would be primarily around dashboarding and data warehousing. There are IT resources that would be related to that. In addition, there's evidence technicians that would assist at the police department. And from a strategic planning perspective, there would be a position that would assist the district in leading those type efforts for strategic planning. And then finally, probably the biggest component of what would be requested is the compensation component. As Luis mentioned, there is a 2% included currently within the base budget, if you will. That is a placeholder. A TRE would allow for a 4% compensation adjustment in total and address the stipends and equity issues that also adjust. So this is not 2% plus 4%. The total compensation package would be around 4%. So that would be available or possible if we were to go forward with a TRE. As we look at the 3-year outlook, if we were to go forward with a tax ratification election, what I'll point out, and I don't think I can get the pointer, but the second line under operating revenues TRE, that shows the $35.2 million that would go forward if the tax ratification election were successful. And then you can see the incremental gains each year as a result of the 5% growth. On the expenditure side, you see the $32.9 million in expenditure. Those are the ones that we showed you in the previous slides. That is held constant, but the incremental costs associated with the positions, such as raises, et cetera, is included on the operating expenditure side. But overall, as we look at the picture, if we were to move forward with a tax ratification election and implement the programs that we shared with you previously, we do maintain our 90-day fund balance reserve requirement in all years of the forecast. The forecast is also assuming that we continue to set aside funds in committed fund balance for new instructional facilities as well as for major maintenance in the event that we have unforeseen building repairs needed outside of the bond. And our major maintenance remains at $6.4 million over all 4 years of the forecast. On the new instructional facilities, those funds are set aside, but we're also assuming that those get utilized prior to the end of the forecast as we move forward with opening the additional elementary campuses as well as the high school. So how does that look from an overall perspective? This is a breakout of the fund balance under the tax ratification election, and as you can see, in all years, the fund balance either meets or exceeds our 90-day fund balance requirement under a TRE. So we've talked through the revenues, how the TRE revenues would be utilized, as well as how it supports board priorities that couldn't be supported under the budget as is. And what we'll do now is walk you through the calendar that would be required if we move forward with the election. And I do want to start out by saying that the dates that were selected were based on advice we received from outside counsel who advised us on the process in terms of conducting a TRE. We do I can't remember the exact word now, but retain, that's the word I'm looking for. Retain outside legal counsel. Purdue is our tax attorney, delinquent tax attorney, and part of their services does include advising us on tax ratification election and other tax issues. So 2 important factors to consider when planning for a TRE. The first one is that the budget adopted must include expenditures that would support the tax rate required under TRE. And the second is that the tax rate must be adopted at least 10 days before the actual budget is adopted. So those are 2 factors that were taken into consideration as we looked at the potential of doing a TRE. The first trigger that would be for the TRE is we would be required to use the early adoption of the tax rate schedule. And when we use that particular calendar, what we have to do is use the preliminary certified roll received from the chief appraiser. And as Luis mentioned, we did receive that on April 29th. It was right in line with the 5% that we were expecting, so we don't expect by the time we receive the certified roll anything would change there. But we have the first piece of the puzzle, if you will, to move forward with the tax ratification election. The next step would be to call public hearings on the budget and the tax rate. We would be on the agenda this evening. We do have that as part of the package. There is one correction that we'll need to make that I'll share with you in just a moment. And then once that public hearing has been called, that triggers the need to publish the public hearing of the tax rate as well as the budget. And that would occur on May the 22nd. It would appear in the paper, and concurrently we would post to our website all of the information associated with that as required by state statute. And then on June the 3rd, and this is different than what's presented in the documents this evening, that would be if the board opts to adopt a tax rate that exceeds $1.06, a TRE would be called at that same meeting. The agenda item this evening indicates June the 10th. However, that date was selected because we were trying to keep everything within the regular meetings that the board already has scheduled. However, when we consulted with the attorneys, they did point out that we have to have 10 days between the adoption of the tax rate and the adoption of the budget. So in order to accommodate that, we are recommending a special meeting on June the 3rd where the public hearing on the tax rate would be held, as well as the vote on the tax rate. And again, if the board opts to adopt a tax rate in excess of $1.06, you would also be calling for a tax ratification election at that particular point. And then the last action that you would have would be before an election would be held would be the public hearing and adoption of the budget on June the 17th. And this flows with our normal process that you're probably accustomed to. It's just the tax rate adoption will be a little bit different this year because we're using the early adoption process as opposed to our regular process. To wrap things up, the purpose for calling a TRE is that under current law, We are not, and collection rates, we are not expecting any additional revenue, and we have limited funds to add new resources and address staff compensation. Calling a TRE will ensure that the district has the flexibility, given the current uncertainty around legislation and revenues, to address those particular issues. And if the TRE is successful, it will generate sufficient funds to support board priorities, as well as provide the flexibility to allow for sustained compensation and adjustments, and to keep us competitive with neighboring districts. And then finally, as I mentioned, it does keep us within the 90-day fund balance policy. And before completing things, the one thing that I will point out that's very important, and we confirmed this with the attorneys, is that if the board calls for a tax, proposes publishing a tax rate that exceeds the $1.06 or goes up to $1.17, you are not required to hold the election. If we get information from the state that something is different than what we're expecting, you have the ability to not hold that election. Primarily, the reason that we're recommending this is, one, is if nothing changes with current law, you have the ability to move forward with flexibility to raise the revenue necessary to support the priorities that have been outlined. On the other hand, if something comes up and we receive additional revenue we're not expecting, you also have the flexibility of not taking action in respect to a tax ratification election. So what we're doing is trying to recommend a strategy that allows you to have the flexibility with finances that we would not otherwise have if we did not recommend a TRE election. And that concludes our presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, so before we get into questions, if you don't mind, let me just make some comments here. So the timeline, why are we recommending August? So there's a couple of reasons why we're recommending August. First of all, there's a big difference between having a TRE from a budget certainty perspective, especially with regard to compensation. If you know something in August, that's a lot better than waiting till November. Okay, it gives us the opportunity to be able to put some things in place very early on in the school year. Also, this does definitely, if we go through this, it would eliminate any kind of need for an efficiency audit or anything along those lines. That law is not expected to take place and to be in place until September 1st. So that's really the two main reasons why we'd recommend the August timeframe. Also, if you look at this, go back to the revenue associated with the TRE. This is the revenue associated with 11 pennies with recapture. I mean, there is recapture now in current law because it's based on our value is over the 319,000 WADA per student, and so we would have some recapture without any change. But both bills that are in play right now, both the Senate bill and the House bill, do increase the value of the copper pennies to the extent that we would not expect recapture on those copper pennies for many years. And so that's a good thing. And so we would expect the actual TRE revenue to be significantly higher. 11 pennies on their own is going to be worth at least $44 million. If they do add to the number of pennies available, both on the, especially from a House bill side, the House bill TRE could be worth as much as $68 million. And so there's a big difference, okay, between what you're seeing here. This is just what it would look like under current law. So anyway, the other thing that's encouraging about some of the changes that are being made, well, there's not a long list of encouraging things from Austin, but one of the things that is encouraging is that unlike prior years when districts would do a TRE and they would say, hey, we're going to have a TRE up to $1.17, they would have to take that whole amount. We could amend, we could actually go back and not necessarily have to spend everything, okay? And so we wouldn't necessarily have to, we would adopt a rate that would go up to that amount and we'd be there for a year, but if we wanted to scale it back and then step up to it in the future, we could do that. And so that's one of the things that's a little bit more beneficial. In the prior years, it's like once you had the election, you went there. If you went down, you could go down, but you'd have to have an election to go back up again. And we know that elections aren't free. They do cost money, and there's a lot of trouble associated with them. So that's just a couple of the comments I wanted to make. I'm sure you have other questions, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Bassett. We appreciate the presentation. Mr. Rice, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Perdine. That is a lot of information to assimilate. in the big picture, I think I'm hearing two things. One, with it's folly to predict a budget based on anything other than current law, because no one has a crystal ball to know what the legislature is going to do. So that's our baseline, and we adapt from there. Second, we've got a standard budget, which we can make work, but we cannot afford board priorities, which are designed to take care of our kids. We can't have K-5 literacy, STEM, and English language arts. We can't have gifted and talented support. We can't have a full day of pre-K expansion. We can't have early childhood instructional support, and all those many things that are aimed at improving student achievement and student outcomes. So you've presented two budgets, one with and one without. The one without, we can make it work under current law. We don't know what the House and the Senate are going to come up with yet. However, if we want to include the board priorities, which again are based on addressing student needs, we've got to have the TRE. And everything that you've presented up there is based on current law, the current recapture thresholds. You'll have, well, I guess we'll just wait and get into it if and when, well, when the legislature comes down on that. Now, Mr. Bassett, am I to understand, and I understand the need to move forward at this time, because we would have to call for a tax ratification election in August, and it is better for us to know if we can afford to give raises at this time or not, rather than in November at the end of the year, right before Christmas. But are we not required? Did I hear you say that we would not be required to conduct the efficiency audit the legislature is recommending because it has not yet gone into effect? It has not yet become law?
That's correct. And what we've seen, there's a lot of bills that push everything to a November timeframe in addition to the efficiency audit, but none of those have listed that they would necessarily take place immediately. Anything would go into effect September 1st. Okay. I've seen two different timeframes for efficiency audit. One that you would have to have it, this November, or others it may wait a year. But again, we're not sure what'll actually end up being in the law.
And one thing I've heard you say in the past, under the current discussions taking place in Austin with the elimination of the CEI, Fort Bend ISD is a loser in that area. And am I to understand that other school districts, such as Spring Branch and A-Leaf and close to home, are big winners?
Yeah, their revenue per ADA is significantly higher than our district. Mm-hmm. So under the House bill scenario, the gap is a little bit tighter on the Senate side because so much is supposed to go into the salary increase, which is for everybody. Mm-hmm. But the gaps on the House bill are pretty significant.
I know we had a very successful teacher recruitment day. I think was that at Constellation Field? We had 1,200, and still, isn't there a shortage of teachers in the state of Texas?
That's correct.
So all the surrounding school districts are vying to get good teachers, and for us to remain competitive, we have to give raises.
Yes, sir.
And in the last budget cycle, I think I heard you say that we gave a step raise and a one-time retention bonus, but that was a one-time deal.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Nice presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes, Mr. Rice actually covered much of what I wanted to ask. So I'm glad you clarified the part about if we're asking for 11 cents, because that's a lot of money, right off the bat. Would we still, how would that work if the state compressed our tax rate down to $1 or whatever it's on, 98 cents?
Under the House bill, which it goes down to from the base rate from $1 to 96 pennies. So we would go from 106 down to the 102. But they have it in their bill to actually still go up to $1.17 with adding 2 gold pennies and 13 copper pennies. And so we could still go up that high. The Senate bill wouldn't allow you to go up quite as much if that's what comes through.